Hi everyone. Such a beautiful day here on the porch. If you are new to our study, we are seeking to read through the Bible, and these videos are simply one tool to help you. I'm sending these out before you read the material, but there may be times when they are helpful to look at as you are reading, so you can always come back and look at it. Questions can always be put in the comments. Another reminder is that you are going through the Bible. Don't forget the big picture. Don't get so caught up in the little questions and concerns that you are forgetting the big picture. 4 questions to help you. 1, what does the passage say about God? 2, what does the passage say about humanity? 3, what does the passage say about the relationship between God and humanity? And 4, what is God telling me in this passage? At the close of last week's readings, Moses was on holy ground. God had called out to him from the burning bush, "Moses, Moses, take off your sandals, because you are standing on holy ground." Of course, Moses did take off his sandals, and God told him to go to Egypt and bring his people out of that land of slavery. Moses balks a little bit, and we begin this week's readings with God convincing Moses to go. God turns Moses' staff into a snake, his hand a leprosy, and then he heals it. And then God reminds Moses that he has a brother who God is sending to help. Finally, God gets tired of the excuses and says to Moses, "Go, I will be with you, and I will instruct you in what to say." It's Exodus 4:12. So Moses goes. Things don't go right for Moses at first. Moses discovers leadership is hard. Pharaoh doesn't let the people go, and instead increases the people's work and their hardship. The people, in return, grumble against Moses. God sends a plague, and that doesn't work. Pharaoh grumbles. The people grumble again. Everyone is grumbling against God's chosen leader, Moses. Plagues come and plagues go. Pharaoh makes promises and then breaks them, makes promises again and breaks them. Moses' work is not easy. In this week's lessons, we will read about the 10 plagues, water turning to blood, frogs, lice, flies, livestock, pestilence, boils, hail, locusts, darkness, and finally, the killing of the firstborn. The story of the final plague is still very important to our Jewish friends. It is one of the most important holy days on their calendar. God had his people paint blood from a lamb on their door, eat a quick meal, and then God's death angel killed all the firstborn in Egypt, except those who had the blood of the lamb on their door. Pharaoh finally relented and sent the people away. They left quickly, but they had been ready to go. This is the story that is still celebrated by Jews today with the holy day of Passover. Passover today is a joyful meal, joyous meal with laughter, and it is a great reminder that as God worked then, so God works now. God is faithful. When Christians celebrate Holy Communion and remember Jesus taking bread and a cup of wine, he had most likely been eating a Passover meal with his disciples. There is some scholarly debate about that, but most of the evidence points to it being a Passover meal. When we take bread and juice, we are remembering that Jesus is the Passover lamb, and through his blood, we are freed from sin. On a side note, last Maundy, Thursday, the Trinity staff acted out a final meal. It is worth your time to search the Trinity UMC YouTube channel and take a look. You will learn some things about Passover and about communion. Well, the Israelites left the land of Egypt quickly. Yet the exhilaration of leaving Egypt was short-lived when Pharaoh and Egypt changed their mind and grief turned to anger. The Egyptians chased the Israelites. Let me show you a map. It is a map of possible routes that the Israelites could have taken. You see Egypt on your left, the land of Goshen, which is where Joseph had his family settle. And then you'll see the three routes. The southern route is the more traditional route with scholars. You see the Red Sea, the wilderness of Sin, and then finally Mount Sinai. The northern route is the preferred route by some scholars, with not the Red Sea, but the Sea of Reeds, a different pronunciation of the Hebrew. And then you see the wilderness of Zin and Kadesh Barnea being there before they went to Mount Sinai. There's also a couple of different central routes, which some scholars prefer. Now, my Old Testament professor many years ago thought the northern route was a better possibility, which makes me a little biased, but the truth is, the specifics of the route don't matter much to me. I look at things a little bit differently than some. You see, I believe God brought the people out of Egypt. The people crossed the sea on dry land, and God saved the people that day. The specifics of where and how are not really all that important to me. The Bible is a book of faith, and sometimes we can get so caught up in the specifics that we miss the greater message. The inspiration of the Bible does not hinge upon certain specifics which new study and evidence could change. What is God doing is the better question. With the external threat from the Egyptians having drowned in the sea, the threat of the people becomes more internal. Having seen God do miracle after miracle, there is a time of celebration, but then it is followed by some more grumbling. First, they are thirsty, and they remember not the harsh conditions of slavery, but the immediate concerns of being thirsty. I think we see in this passage how quickly people can forget. People often see God at work and then quickly forget when the first sign of trouble comes. This is not only a story of ancient Israel, but a story of God's people who forget God's faithfulness. It can even be our story. God's people, as we will see regularly throughout the rest of the Bible, would regularly see God's faithfulness and then doubt and then grumble and complain. We do the same thing. We complain against leaders, both religious and political, but when we do so, if we are not careful, we are actually grumbling and complaining and doubting what God has done and what God can do. Guess I better stop preaching to myself. The story in Exodus 18, where Moses visits his father-in-law, is one dear and near to the pastor's heart. We're reminded that one person can't do it all. It takes the gifts and graces and wisdom of many to do the work of God. Remember what I've been saying about the Bible? It is not simply about discovering information, but it is about inward transformation. This is a good example. If we are not regularly using our time, effort, gifts, and talents to help the church grow and do work in the community, then we may be failing. We can leave it up to let me rephrase that. We can't just leave it up to the clergy or church staff. Each of us are called and equipped to do the work of ministry. It begins at our baptism. And when we rely on others or expect others to do all the work, then we are failing God. I guess I better stop preaching in general. Amy agreed.
I did.
The Old Testament passages this week conclude at Mount Sinai and the giving of the Ten Commandments. God gives the people these rules to help them. But before we read them, and before we get too focused upon them, I think we sometimes spend so much time thinking about them that we forget what the passage teaches us about God's holiness and God's greatness. God's great presence is frightening to the people. God's glory causes the people to quake. In the story, they were to prepare to meet God. It took 2 days for them to prepare. Meeting with God was a big deal, a very big deal, and it changed them. It makes me wonder sometimes if we take God's presence a little bit too lightly. It makes me wonder if we have forgotten the holiness and the awesomeness of God in our familiarity and our sometimes glib pronouncements that God is with us. Do we fail to remember God's greatness? God is friend. Yes, we need to remember that because of Jesus. But God is still great and awesome. When was the last time you truly took time to meet with God in worship? Sometimes wonder, do we fail to receive something out of our worship services because we are simply wanting to be entertained, but not truly coming into God's presence, the presence of an awesome God? Started preaching again. As you read Exodus 19 this week, ask God how you should be preparing for worship. Don't take it so lightly. You may discover that God meets you in a completely different way. Let's move on to the New Testament, Matthew 15 to 18. This reading begins with a sharp denunciation of the religious leaders of the day. That's kind of scares me because I am a religious leader today. Jesus doesn't mince words for those who had religious authority in his day and for those who would have considered themselves religious. He says, the people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far away. He says, in essence, it is by what you say that you are defiled. As a religious leader today, these types of passages do cause my ears to perk up. It makes me want to run away from my calling in some ways, but much more, it makes me want to run to God and get quiet, examine my heart, but also my words. When words of hate and judgment and anger are constantly coming from our mouths, we too are judged. We may get mad at something or someone, but the words that come from our mouth show where our heart truly can be found. Tough words. The next story is a healing of the Gentile woman's child, and it shows God's care and love for the world. Matthew was writing primarily to a Jewish audience, but he also makes certain to remind people that Jesus was for everyone. We saw that earlier in Matthew. We saw that the Magi, probably Gentiles, came to worship the baby Jesus. Here in this story, we see an adult Jesus showing compassion to a Gentile. He was probably a little playful with the woman, but we must always remember that Jesus was for all people. Jesus continues to do the ministry we mentioned a couple weeks ago, traveling around the cities, teaching, healing, offering compassion to all. Jesus is transfigured, and we catch a glimpse of his majesty, not unlike what we saw in Exodus. The disciples were amazed, and they were astounded at the change by that event. Do we stand amazed when we are in the presence of Jesus the Nazarene? The Matthew chapters this week conclude with the story of the lost sheep, reminding us not only that Jesus seeks us out, but in our lives we are called to look for those who have wandered away. Instead of judgment, we seek those who have wandered away, loving and inviting them back. In a world where many have lost their way, we are called to follow in the footsteps of Jesus and seek people out, not wait for them to come to us. The church is about being a community of love and forgiveness. And Matthew 18 points this out again. we must forgive as often as one offends us. Ironically, in the same week that we read about and probably cheer the Ten Commandments, we also must realize that this is a command. It is our command to forgive others. As you read this week, continue to pray and act and be transformed. If you get behind, don't worry, you can catch up. Be blessed, my friends, and be not only a reader and a listener of the Scriptures, but go and be a doer.